Have you ever been the one person in your family that everyone writes off? The designated failure they trot out at family gatherings just to make themselves feel better? I lived that reality for 28 years, until one disastrous birthday party gave me the push I needed to burn their world to the ground. The air in the country club was thick with the scent of money and lilies. It was my Uncle Mark's 60th birthday party, a lavish affair that made my simple, knee-length dress feel like a sackcloth. I clutched my small purse to my side, trying to make myself as small as possible. My mother, Sharon, stood beside me, her hand fluttering nervously to pat my arm every few minutes. "Just smile, Sloane," she'd whisper, her eyes darting around the room, terrified of her sister's judgment. "Try to look like you're having a good time, for." I tried. I really did, but it was hard to smile when you felt like a bug under a microscope. The main event of the evening, as always, was my cousin Brittany. She was the family's golden child, and tonight was no exception. My Aunt Carol, draped in a dress that shimmered like a pool of oil, raised her champagne flute for a toast. Her voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the low chatter of the room. "To my wonderful husband, Mark, on his 60th birthday," she began. A polite smattering of applause followed. "And to our brilliant daughter, Brittany, who just last week accepted a position as vice president of marketing at Sterling Corp." The applause was louder this time, genuine. My uncle beamed, wrapping an arm around Brittany, who preened under the attention. Then, Aunt Carol's eyes, cold and calculating, found me in the crowd. A thin smile played on her lips. "And of course, we're so happy to have our Sloane here with us." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang in the air. She's still figuring things out. But we love her anyway." A wave of condescending laughter rippled through our relatives. It wasn't loud or cruel, but worse. It was gentle, pitying. The kind of laugh you give a child who has tried and failed. I felt my cheeks burn, a familiar hot shame creeping up my neck. My mother's hand tightened on my arm. A silent plea to endure it, to keep the peace. Later, as I was trying to blend in with the wallpaper near the hors d'oeuvres table, Brittany cornered me. She swirled her wine, the diamond on her finger catching the light. "Sloane, darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Mom told me you got another little job. Data entry, is it? How exciting." "It pays the bills," I mumbled, my eyes fixed on a miniature quiche. "I'm sure it does," she said. "It's just, don't you ever want more for yourself?" A spark of defiance flickered inside me. "I actually just got a research grant," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Brittany leaned in, pretending she couldn't hear me. "A what? A grant? Oh, that's cute. A little science fair project?" She threw her head back and laughed, a loud, theatrical sound that drew the attention of a nearby cluster of our cousins. She turned to them, her smile wide and predatory. "Hey everyone, did you hear? Sloane thinks her little hobby is a career. Isn't that adorable?" They all laughed with her. I stood there, frozen, as they mocked the one thing I was passionate about. I was useless, a nobody with a silly hobby. The final, crushing blow came during the gift opening. My gift to Uncle Mark was thoughtful, personal. I'd found a faded black and white photograph of him as a boy with his father, my late grandfather. I spent weeks carefully restoring it, colorizing it by hand, and putting it in a handsome oak frame. He opened it, gave it a cursory glance, and set it on the table beside him with a mumbled, "Oh, nice." The very next gift was from Brittany, a heavy green box from Rolex. Uncle Mark's eyes lit up as he lifted the gleaming gold watch from its velvet pillow. He strapped it on, gushing about its craftsmanship, its weight, its beauty. Brittany caught my eye from across the room and smirked, mouthing the words that would echo in my head for months. "Some people have taste," she said, her voice a triumphant whisper on the air. "Others just have time." I was done, utterly and completely done. I felt nothing but a cold, hollow space where my desire for their approval used to be. I was excluded, laughed at, and dismissed. Without a word to my mother, without a single goodbye, I turned and walked out of the country club. The sound of their laughter followed me into the cool night air, but I didn't care anymore. It was the last time. I swore to myself, under the pale moonlight, that it was the very last time I would ever let them make me feel like a nobody. They had no idea who they had just pushed into the darkness. The taste of my humiliation was salty, just like the broth of the instant noodles I was eating for dinner. My apartment, a tiny box on the fourth floor of a rundown building, felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed to be closing in, papered with the pale pink of overdue bills, one for rent, two for my student loans, another a final notice for my credit card. The small research grant I'd been so proud to mention to Brittany was real, but it was a pittance. After buying a few necessary supplies and paying last month's rent, it was gone, vanished like a drop of water on a hot skillet. This was my reality. This was the life of the family failure. I stared at the peeling paint on the wall opposite me, the shame from the party replaying in my mind like a movie I couldn't turn off. Aunt Carol's pitying smile. The soft, condescending laughter. Brittany's triumphant smirk. They saw me as a loser, a charity case they had to tolerate at family dinners and holiday reunions. And maybe, I thought, my spoon scraping the bottom of the cheap plastic bowl. Maybe they were right. Hoping for a sliver of comfort, for one person to be on my side, I picked up my phone and called my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Sloan, where did you go? Carol was asking about you. You just disappeared." "I had to leave, Mom," I said, my voice thick. "You saw how they were treating me." I heard her sigh, a long, weary sound that I knew all too well. It was the sigh of surrender. "Honey, you know how they are. Your aunt, she says things. And Brittany is just so proud of her success. You shouldn't take it so personally. She called my work a hobby, Mom." They laughed at me. "Well, maybe if you just called and apologized for leaving so abruptly, it would smooth things over," she said, her voice hopeful. "Just keep the peace, Sloan. Don't make waves." A slap in the face would have hurt less. Apologize? For being humiliated? For being their punching bag? The last bit of warmth in my chest turned to ice. It wasn't just them. It was my own mother, choosing their comfort over my dignity. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of abandonment. I was completely and utterly alone. "Okay, Mom," I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. "I have to go." I hung up before she could say another word. The silence in my apartment was deafening. But instead of crushing me, it filled me with something new. A cold, hard resolve began to form in the pit of my stomach. No more keeping the peace, no more shrinking myself to fit into their tiny judgmental world. My eyes scanned the room, landing on a dusty cardboard box shoved under my bed. I pulled it out, the tape groaning as I tore it open. Inside, nestled in yellowing paper, were my university theses, my project notes, my old textbooks, my entire life's work, dismissed by my family as a nerdy little hobby. My fingers traced the faded title on the cover of my senior project. A theoretical model for a lignine-based biodegradable polymer. A revolutionary bioplastic, strong as conventional plastic, but capable of decomposing in months, not centuries. My professors had called the concept brilliant, a potential game changer, but in the end they had dismissed it too theoretical, too complex, too expensive to synthesize outside of a multi-million-dollar lab. I opened the binder, looking at the pages filled with complex equations and molecular diagrams. This was my language. This was the world where I wasn't a failure. This was the world where I was smart, capable, and visionary. They had mocked this. They had laughed at this. A fire lit inside me, burning away the shame and the hurt. They had called me a loser. They had called me a nobody. Fine. I would take the very thing they despised. the very core of who I am, and I would build an empire with it. The secret transformation of Sloane Parker had just begun. They wanted a show? I would give them one they would never forget. My tiny kitchen was no place to revolutionize the plastics industry. The equations staring back at me from my notebook were a map to a treasure I couldn't possibly unearth with a microwave and a coffee pot. I needed a real lab. I needed equipment, resources, and space. And I was broke. The thought was a lead weight in my stomach. For a day, I let the despair wash over me, the sheer impossibility of it all. I was a data entry clerk with a brilliant idea and an empty bank account. It was a cruel joke, but the memory of my family's laughter was a sharper pain than the hopelessness. I wouldn't quit. There had to be a way. And then, a name surfaced from the depths of my memory. A ghost from my university days. Dr. Alistair Finch. Dr. Finch wasn't just a professor. He was a legend in the biochemical engineering department. A genius with a notoriously short temper and zero tolerance for fools. He saw potential where others saw problems. But his brilliance was matched only by his contempt for the university's bureaucracy. A few years ago, after a bitter falling out with the dean over research funding, he'd taken an early, unceremonious retirement and vanished from the academic world. No one knew where he'd gone. He had been my senior project advisor. He was the one who had written brilliant, but impractical in red ink on my final paper. He saw the potential, even if he'd also seen the obstacles. He was my only shot. With hands that trembled so badly I could barely type, I sat at my cheap laptop and began to draft an email. I deleted the first 3 drafts. They sounded too desperate, too much like a student begging for a grade. The 4th was too clinical, too cold. Finally, I just wrote from the heart. I told him I had never stopped thinking about the polymer project. I explained that I had spent the last 2 years refining the theoretical model, that I'd found a potential new catalytic pathway that could drastically reduce the synthesis cost. I attached my updated research, a 50-page document I had poured my soul into during late nights and lonely weekends. I ended it simply, "I know this is a long shot, Dr. Finch, but I believe I can make this work. I just need a chance." I hit send, and my heart hammered against my ribs. It felt like I had just screamed into the void. I expected nothing. A man like that, a reclusive genius, wouldn't bother with a former student who was now, for all intents and purposes, a failure. I went to bed that night, convinced I'd made a fool of myself. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a new email notification. My breath caught in my throat. The sender was A. Finch. The subject line was blank. I opened it. There was only one line of text. "My lab. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. Don't be late." An address followed. It was in an industrial park on the outskirts of the city, a place of warehouses and factories. The next morning, I stood before a large, unmarked corrugated steel building. It looked abandoned. For a moment I thought it was a prank, but the door was unlocked. I pushed it open and stepped inside. My jaw dropped. The space was vast, a converted warehouse filled with gleaming, state-of-the-art equipment, gas chromatographs, mass spectrometers, high-pressure reactors. It was a scientist's paradise. It was worth millions. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the lab. Dr. Finch looked older, his hair grayer and his face etched with deeper lines. But his eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and piercing. He was wearing a grease-stained lab coat over a simple t-shirt. He didn't smile or say hello. "Parker," he grunted, his voice a low rumble. "You claimed you solved the cost problem. Explain." For the next hour, I stood before him, using a whiteboard to walk him through my new equations, my new theories. I pointed out the flaws in my original model and showed him how I had corrected them. I spoke with a passion and confidence I hadn't felt in years. He listened intently, not interrupting once, his gaze fixed on the whiteboard. When I finished, I was out of breath, my heart pounding. He was silent for a full minute, just staring at my work. Then he turned to me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was a gleam of pure intellectual excitement. The university fools said this was a dead end, he grunted, a corner of his mouth twitching upwards in what might have been a smile. They're blind. He walked over to a metal cabinet and pulled out a key on a simple ring. He tossed it to me. I caught it. It felt heavy in my palm, like the key to a kingdom. I'll give you a key, he said, his voice firm. You work nights. The day crew is mine. You pay for your own materials. I'll give you my supplier contacts. And don't break my stuff. I stood there, speechless, clutching the key. Tears welled in my eyes. Thank you, Dr. Finch, I whispered. Thank you. He just grunted again. Don't thank me. Get to work. Prove me right. As I walked out of that warehouse, the cool morning air felt electric on my skin. This was it. This was the first real hope I'd had in years. This was the beginning of my secret war. The months that followed bled into one another, a blur of exhaustion and fierce determination. My life split into two starkly different realities. By day, I was Sloane Parker, the quiet girl in cubicle 7B, staring at a flickering monitor, my mind numb from the endless mind-numbing task of entering numbers into spreadsheets. My boss would drop stacks of paper on my desk with a sigh, as if the act of acknowledging my existence was a heavy burden. I'd nod, say nothing, and do the work. I was a ghost in a gray suit, invisible, which was exactly how I needed it to be. But when the clock hit 5, a switch flipped inside me. I would practically run from the office building, grabbing a cheap sandwich on the way to the industrial park. The moment I unlocked the door to Dr. Finch's lab, I became a different person. Here, I was not a nobody. I was a scientist, an inventor, a creator. The lab became my sanctuary and my battlefield. Night after night, I worked under the harsh fluorescent lights, the hum of the ventilation system my only companion. I lived on black coffee and sheer unadulterated will. More than once, I fell asleep on the small, lumpy cot in the corner office, my cheek pressed against a textbook, only to be woken by the sound of Dr. Finch's day crew arriving at dawn. The struggle was visceral, a constant weight on my shoulders. My bank account dwindled to almost nothing. Every spare dollar went to chemical suppliers. My diet consisted of protein bars and the cheapest coffee I could find. A small, shiny pink scar formed on my forearm, a permanent reminder of a failed experiment where a beaker of acid had bubbled over too quickly. It ached sometimes, a dull throb that reminded me of how close I was to failure at any given moment. My family, of course, noticed my absence. My mother's calls became more frequent, her voice laced with a mixture of concern and disapproval. Sloane, where are you? Aunt Carol is planning a family reunion, and she needs a head count. Are you sick? You sound tired. I'm fine, Mom. I'd lie, my voice raspy from lack of sleep. Just busy with work. A big project. The data entry job? She'd ask, unable to hide her disappointment. Well, try to make time. Family is important. I dodged their calls, ignored their texts, and made myself a ghost to them too. The isolation was a heavy cloak, but it was also my armor. They couldn't mock what they didn't know. One Saturday afternoon, bleary-eyed and desperate for a caffeine fix that didn't come from the lab's ancient coffee machine, I ventured to a trendy coffee shop downtown. And that's where I saw them. My cousin Brittany, and her new fiancé, a man I'd only seen in pictures on her social media. His name was Caleb Hayes. He was handsome in a clean-cut, expensive suit kind of way, and he was listening to Brittany with an adoring expression as she animatedly told a story. I tried to back out before they saw me, but it was too late. Brittany's eyes locked on mine. Her perfect smile widened. Sloane. Oh my God, what are you doing here? She chirped, as if we were the best of friends. I was trapped. I walked over, my worn-out jeans and faded t-shirt feeling impossibly shabby next to their weekend brunch attire. "Caleb, darling, this is my cousin Sloane," Brittany said, her hand possessively on his arm. "Sloane, this is my fiancé, Caleb." Caleb stood up and offered me his hand. "It's great to finally meet you, Sloane. I've heard a lot about you." I shook his hand. His grip was firm, his smile polite, but I saw it in his eyes, a flicker of something I knew all too well, pity. Brittany had clearly painted her carefully crafted picture of me for him, the sweet, lost little cousin who was still trying to find her way. The family failure, he was the neutral observer, an outsider looking in, and the lens through which he saw me had been ground and polished by Brittany's lies. "Sloane is so creative," Brittany continued, her voice dripping with condescension, "always working on her little projects. We're all so proud of her, for trying." Caleb's smile tightened slightly. He looked from Brittany to me, a hint of confusion in his expression, as if the person Brittany described didn't quite match the quiet, intense woman standing before him. He was a banker. He dealt in numbers and facts, and something, just a tiny something, didn't add up for him. The interaction was brief, lasting less than 5 minutes, but it was a crucial turning point. Seeing the pity in this stranger's eyes, a man who would soon be part of my family, solidified my resolve. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want anyone's pity. I wanted their respect, and I knew the only way to get it was to remain invisible, to toil away in secret, until the day I could shatter the narrative they had all so willingly believed. I left the coffee shop with a bitter taste in my mouth, the encounter a stark reminder of the world I was fighting against. It made the long, lonely nights in the lab feel less like a sacrifice, and more like a necessity. Failure became a familiar taste. For 6 straight months, every experiment ended the same way. The liquid in the beaker would refuse to stabilize, separating into a useless murky sludge, or hardening into a brittle glass-like substance that shattered if I so much as breathed on it. I followed my new equations to the letter, cross-referencing every variable, but something was missing. The mountain I was trying to climb seemed to grow taller with every failed attempt. The exhaustion was a physical weight, pressing down on my bones. Despair began to creep in, a cold, insidious fog that whispered in my ear during the loneliest hours of the night. "They were right. You are a failure. This is just a hobby. Give up." I was on the verge of it. One night, after a particularly disastrous result that cost me $200 in wasted materials, money I really didn't have, I just sat on the cold concrete floor of the lab and cried. I buried my face in my hands, the small, scarred patch on my arm throbbing in sympathy with my shattered hopes. The main lab door creaked open. I looked up to see Dr. Finch standing there, holding a takeout container. He rarely came in during my night shifts, preferring to leave notes on the whiteboard. He must have seen my broken expression on the security feed. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, sat on a stool beside me, and handed me the container. It was warm. Inside was a simple meal of rice and chicken. We ate in silence for a few minutes. He didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me to cheer up. He just let me be. When I had finished, he gestured to the mess on my workbench. "Tell me what you did," he said, his voice quiet. I walked him through the process, my voice dull and lifeless. When I got to the final step, the catalytic agent I was using, he held up a hand. He picked up my notebook and flipped through the pages, his brow furrowed in concentration. He stopped on a page filled with my frantic calculations. He tapped a single, overlooked variable in a long string of equations. "Here," he said. "This is your problem. You're trying to force it. You're fighting the polymer's natural inclination. You're treating it like an enemy to be conquered." He looked at me, his gaze intense. "Science isn't a battle, Parker. It's a dance. You have to let the reaction guide you, listen to what it's telling you." It was such a simple shift in perspective, but it was like a key turning in a lock I didn't even know was there. I had been so focused on my own formula, so determined to prove my theory right that I hadn't been observing what was actually happening. A new energy surged through me. I spent the next 2 hours running new simulations on the computer, adjusting the parameters not based on my rigid hypothesis, but on the data from my failures. The results were astounding. A new pathway emerged, one that was elegant, simple, and stable. My hands shook as I prepped the experiment one more time. This time, it felt different. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was collaborating. I added the final agent, and instead of a violent, unstable reaction, the liquid began to change. It shimmered, then slowly coalesced, setting into a perfectly clear, flexible material. I picked it up. It was strong, pliable, and felt warm to the touch. It was perfect. Dr. Finch and I just stared at it, a triumphant silence hanging between us. He put a hand on my shoulder, a rare gesture of approval. "There it is," he said softly. "Well done, Parker." The next day, I was walking on air. The world looked brighter, the future limitless. Feeling emboldened, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my mom, wanting to share a piece of my victory, even just a small hint. "Mom, I have some good news," I said, a genuine smile in my voice for the first time in forever. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her voice distracted, flustered. "Listen, I was just on the phone with your Aunt Carol. Funny you should call. Brittany was just asking about you." My good mood evaporated. "Oh?" I said, my voice guarded. "Yes," she said, she heard you were still playing with your chemicals in your spare time. You know, she's starting a new green tech consulting firm, very high-end. And she was just wondering, what you knew about the market. Said she might even have a little job for you, something to get you out of that data entry position. My blood ran cold. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Playing with chemicals, a green tech firm, the seemingly innocent, friendly inquiry felt like a predator scouting its prey. Brittany wasn't offering a life raft. She was circling, smelling success in the water, and she was trying to figure out if it was mine. The euphoria of my breakthrough was immediately replaced by a cold, sharp-edged paranoia. Dr. Finch saw it on my face the moment I walked into the lab that evening. "What is it?" he asked, not even looking up from the spectrometer he was calibrating. I told him about the phone call, about Brittany's sudden interest, her green tech consulting firm. He stopped what he was doing and turned to face me, his expression grim. "It's starting," he said, his voice low. "The moment you have a viable product, the sharks start circling. They smell money. You have to protect this, Sloan." "Now, protect it how?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "A patent," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "The strongest one we can get. It's the only thing that will give you a legal claim to your work. Without it, your formula is just an idea, and anyone can steal an idea." He made a call. The next day, I found myself in a sleek, downtown office with panoramic views of the city. I was sitting across from a woman named Miss Hayes, a partner at one of the top patent law firms in the country. She was sharp, impeccably dressed, and radiated an aura of intimidating competence. I felt like a child in her presence, but as I explained my invention, laying out the chemistry and the potential applications, her professional demeanor melted away, replaced by the same look of genuine excitement I had seen in Dr. Finch's eyes. "Miss Parker," she said, leaning forward, her voice filled with awe, "do you have any idea what you've created? A fully biodegradable polymer with this tensile strength and thermal resistance. It's not just revolutionary, it's the holy grail. This could disrupt dozens of industries from packaging to manufacturing to medicine." The validation was exhilarating, but it was followed by a crushing dose of reality. She slid a document across the polished mahogany desk. It was a retainer agreement. The number printed at the bottom made my stomach lurch. The legal fees for securing a patent this significant would be astronomical. It was a sum of money I couldn't even imagine possessing. I don't have this kind of money," I stammered, the shame returning in a hot wave. Miss Hayes gave me a sympathetic look. Dr. Finch explained your situation. He also explained the urgency. Think of it as an investment, Miss Parker. The most important one you will ever make. I went home that night with the agreement in my bag. The weight of it pressing down on me. I sat on my bed, staring at the overdue bills. There was no way. It was impossible. My dream was right there within my grasp, but it was locked behind a door I couldn't afford to open. I thought about giving up, about just publishing the research online, and letting the world have it. Then I thought about Brittany's smug face. I thought about my aunt calling me a charity case. I thought about my mother telling me to apologize for daring to have feelings. My eyes fell on the small velvet box on my dresser. Inside was the last nice thing I owned, the only thing of real value I had left from my father. It was his watch, a beautiful, classic timepiece he'd received for his own 30th birthday. He'd been so proud of it, he'd told me it represented the value of hard work and time, well spent. I picked it up, the cool metal heavy in my palm. The sacrifice felt like a betrayal of his memory. But then I realized, this was what he was talking about. Investing in my own hard work. The next day, I walked into a downtown jeweler's shop and walked out with a check that was just enough to cover the lawyer's retainer. The emptiness on my wrist was a constant, aching reminder of the cost. It was a moment of deep personal sacrifice, a piece of my past traded for a chance at a future. As Miss Hayes and her team worked feverishly on the patent application, a process that would take months, Brittany's public persona exploded. She launched a lifestyle blog and a series of social media accounts under the name Brittany Vance, Eco-Visionary. Her posts were a masterclass in corporate greenwashing. She posted glossy photos of herself hiking in pristine forests, with captions about reconnecting with Mother Earth. She posted pictures from a green tech reunion conference in Silicon Valley, posing with industry leaders she'd probably only spoken to for 30 seconds. One post, in particular, made my blood run cold. It was a picture of her, smiling radiantly, holding a small green seedling. The caption read, "So inspired to be around people changing the world. It's time for a new way of thinking, a new way of living. Big things are coming. The future is female, and it's green." She wasn't just circling anymore. She was building the narrative. She was creating a public record of her supposed passion, laying the groundwork for the day she would announce her revolutionary discovery. She was building a beautiful, elaborate stage for a play, and my life's work was the script she intended to steal. I watched it all unfold from the shadows, the patent application my only silent prayer. The mail slot of my apartment door clattered. It was usually just junk mail and more bills. But this time, a thick, cream-colored envelope lay on the worn welcome mat. My name and address were written in elegant, swirling calligraphy. It felt heavy, important. My fingers trembled as I tore it open. Inside was a gilded invitation. My eyes scanned the words, and the air left my lungs in a painful rush. "You are cordially invited to the official launch gala for Viridian Innovations, a new vision for a sustainable future." I read on, my heart pounding a frantic, sick rhythm against my ribs. The gala was to be held in the grand ballroom of the five-star Elysian Resort Hotel, and at the bottom, in bold, embossed letters, was the title that felt like a physical blow. Brittany Vance, founder and CEO. She had done it. She had actually done it. She had taken the vague concepts I'd let slip to my mother, the whispers of my work, and built a company around them, Viridian Innovations. The name even sounded like something I would come up with. She had stolen my dream and was now selling tickets to its premiere. I sank onto my couch, the invitation fluttering from my nerveless fingers. I felt a wave of nausea. How could she be so bold, so brazen? My phone rang, shattering the horrified silence. It was my mother. Her voice was bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Sloan, did you get it? The invitation?" "I got it," I said. my voice a hollow echo of itself. Isn't it incredible? Our Brittany, a CEO, a founder, I am just so proud. Your Aunt Carol is over the moon. It's a real family celebration. Of course you're coming, right? You have to be there to support your cousin. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her the truth, to yell that her perfect niece was a fraud, a thief who was parading my soul's work as her own. But what would she say? Don't make waves, Sloane. Are you sure? Maybe it's just a coincidence. I couldn't bear to hear it. I don't know, Mom. I mumbled. Don't be silly. You have to come, she insisted, her voice taking on a sharp edge. It would look terrible if you didn't. What would the family think? I hung up, my hand shaking. I felt trapped, cornered. My first instinct was to hide, to lock my door, turn off my phone, and pretend none of this was happening. Instead, I called the one person I knew would understand. I called Dr. Finch. My voice broke on the first word. She stole it, I choked out, the tears I'd been holding back finally falling. She's launching a company. My idea. I expected him to be angry, to curse. But his voice on the other end of the line was eerily calm. Did she, Sloane? He asked, his tone measured. Or did she just steal a concept? An empty shell? The formula, the precise catalytic process, the manufacturing specifications, that's all yours. It's locked in your head and in my lab. What is she going to present? A pretty logo and a speech? Eud. He paused, and I could hear the faint sound of him tapping on a keyboard. Ah, he said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. Interesting timing. I just got off the phone with Ms. Hayes. The patent, Sloane. It was officially granted and published on the public record this morning. U.S. Patent Number 11B7894. Inventor Sloane Parker. I was stunned into silence. It was done. It was real. My name was on it. This isn't a celebration, Sloane. Dr. Finch continued, his voice hardening into something sharp and strategic. It's a public execution. She's built her own gallows and invited the whole world to watch. This isn't a test of her courage. It's a test of yours. You can hide and let her get away with it. Or you can walk into that lion's den. He paused again, letting the weight of his words sink in. And you're the one holding the key to the cage. I looked at the gilded invitation on the floor. It no longer looked like a threat. It looked like an arena. And I was finally ready to fight. I arrived at the Elysian Resort Hotel, feeling like a ghost walking into her own funeral. The ballroom was a sea of glittering designer gowns, tuxedos, and the clinking of champagne glasses. I, on the other hand, was wearing a simple dark blue sleeveless dress that I'd bought from a thrift store for $20. It was clean and fit me well, but next to the couture creations surrounding me, I might as well have been invisible, which was, for now, the point. I moved through the crowd, a phantom at the feast. I saw familiar faces, aunts, uncles, cousins, who gave me brief, dismissive nods. Their eyes swept over my simple dress, and then quickly moved on, searching for someone more important to talk to. My Aunt Carol, looking like a queen holding court, saw me from across the room. She glided over, her smile as thin and sharp as a razor. So glad you could make it out of your little apartment for the big night, she said, her voice dripping with a condescension so thick it was almost suffocating. Try not to look so overwhelmed, dear. It's a bit pathetic. The old me would have withered under that comment. The old me would have mumbled an apology and fled to a corner. But tonight, I just smiled. A calm, serene smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I wouldn't miss it for the world, Aunt Carol, I said, my voice steady. My composure seemed to unsettle her. She expected the family loser, the quiet, mousy girl she could easily mock. She didn't know what to do with this version of me. She gave a little sniff of disapproval and turned away. I spotted him then, standing near the stage, looking deeply uncomfortable in the spotlight. Caleb Hayes, Brittany's fiancé. He was trapped in the center of the swirling storm of Brittany's ambition, his tie looking just a little too tight, his smile strained. He was the perfect neutral observer, a man who had been sold a story and was now a key player in its public performance. Our eyes met for a second. He gave me a polite, hesitant nod, the kind you give a stranger you vaguely recognize. He had no idea of the role he was about to play. My quiet confidence was a silent disturbance in the family's ecosystem. They were used to me being small, apologetic, and grateful for whatever scraps of attention they threw my way. My stillness, my unbothered calm, was like a foreign object. They didn't know what to make of it. Uncle Mark gave me a puzzled look, as if trying to place where he'd seen this self-assured woman before. I wasn't here as a guest. I wasn't here for their approval. I found a spot near the back wall, content to blend into the shadows. I was here as a spectator, with a front row seat to a train wreck of my own design. And I was going to enjoy the show. The lights in the grand ballroom dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd. A single brilliant spotlight hit the center of the stage. Onto it walked Brittany, and the room erupted in thunderous applause. She looked every bit the part she had created for herself, dressed in a stunning emerald green gown that shimmered under the lights, her hair and makeup flawless. She radiated confidence and power. She was the very picture of a brilliant young CEO. She stepped up to the podium, placing her hands on either side of it, and beamed at the audience. The investors in the front row, a collection of older men in expensive suits, were already eating out of the palm of her hand. My aunt and uncle were in the front row too, their faces masks of pure, unadulterated pride. My mother was a few rows behind them, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Thank you so much," Brittany began, her voice smooth and polished, practiced to perfection. "When I was a little girl, I used to walk in the woods behind my house, and I would be so sad to see a plastic bottle or a wrapper discarded on the ground. I knew, even then, that we had to do better. That I had to do better." I almost choked on the hypocrisy. The only time Brittany ever went into the woods was to sneak cigarettes in high school, she continued, weaving a masterful tale of her lifelong passion for the environment. She spoke of her deep concern for the planet, her desire to leave a better world for future generations. Then, she moved on to the company. Viridian Innovations was born from that passion, she said, her voice swelling with fake emotion. It was born from years of tireless research, long nights spent poring over academic papers, and a relentless belief that a better way was possible. My hands curled into fists at my sides. Years of tireless research? The only thing she'd tirelessly researched was my life. She paused, letting her words hang in the air, and then her eyes scanned the crowd, deliberately finding me in the shadows at the back of the room. She locked her gaze on me, a cruel, triumphant glint in her eyes, and delivered the line she must have been rehearsing for weeks. "This company, this dream, is for anyone who was ever told their ideas were too small. For anyone who was ever underestimated." Her voice rose, filled with righteous power. "This is for anyone who refused to be a failure. I built this from nothing but a dream and sheer determination." The room burst into another round of applause. The investors were beaming, nodding at each other. They had found their visionary. The story was perfect. The narrative was sealed. I felt a flicker of the old fear, the old shame. For a split second, I felt small again, like the loser they all thought I was. The sheer force of her confidence was a physical thing, pressing down on me. I felt my resolve waver. Maybe I should just slip out the back door. Maybe this was a mistake. Then, from across the room, I caught his eye. Dr. Finch was standing near the exit, dressed in a surprisingly well-fitting suit. He wasn't looking at Brittany. He was looking at me. He saw the doubt on my face, the fear in my eyes. He gave me a single, subtle nod, a silent message that said, "Stay, I've got your back. This is your stage, not hers." The fear vanished. replaced by a cold, steady calm. He was right. She had built the stage, but I was the one who had written the play. And the final act was about to begin. Brittany's smile was blinding as the applause died down. "I'd be happy to take a few questions from our esteemed guests and members of the press," she announced, gesturing graciously to the audience. Several hands went up. She pointed to a woman in the front row from a lifestyle magazine who asked a softball question about the brand's aesthetic. Brittany answered it with practiced ease. The next question was from a local news anchor, asking about job creation. Another easy pitch. Brittany was gliding, confident, a master of her own fraudulent universe. She was looking for one more question, her eyes scanning the room for a friendly face. Then, a man in the third row stood up. He wasn't a lifestyle blogger or a local TV personality. I recognized him instantly from industry journals. It was Marcus Thorne, one of the most respected and feared tech journalists in the country. He was known for his brutal, no-nonsense approach to new ventures. He didn't care about pretty logos or inspiring speeches. He cared about data. "Marcus Thorne, TechCrunch," he said, his voice cutting through the room's polite atmosphere like a knife. "Miss Vance, congratulations on the launch. You claim your new polymer, Viridian, is a lignin-based bioplastic. Could you elaborate on the specific catalytic agent used to overcome the inherent hydrophobicity of the lignin macromolecules? And can you speak to the scalability challenges of maintaining a consistent polymerization chain length during mass production, especially concerning thermal degradation?" The room went completely silent. The question, full of pure, technical jargon, hung in the air like a cloud of poison gas. Brittany's confident smile faltered. It didn't just fade, it collapsed. The color drained from her face, leaving her flawless makeup looking like a painted mask on a statue. She froze. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. You could see the panic flooding her eyes, a frantic search for an escape route that didn't exist. She had prepared for questions about branding, about her vision, about the environment. She had not prepared for a question about actual science. "Well, Marcus," she began, her voice a full octave higher than it was moments before. "That's a very technical question." She laughed. A short, nervous bark of a sound that didn't fool anyone. "What's most important, what our investors and our future customers care about, is the result. A truly green product for a better tomorrow." She was trying to deflect, to pivot back to her marketing script, but Marcus Thorne didn't let her off the hook. "With all due respect, Miss Vance," he pressed, his voice unyielding, "the investors I've spoken to care a great deal about whether the technology is scalable and not just a lab bench novelty. The question is about the fundamental viability of your entire company. Can you answer it?" The silence was deafening. Brittany was completely out of her depth, drowning in a sea of words she didn't understand. The confident CEO had vanished, replaced by a terrified student who hadn't done the reading. Her eyes darted around the room, desperately searching for a lifeline. And then they landed on me. A new, cruel kind of light came into her eyes. If she was going down, she was going to take me with her. She was going to have one last moment of humiliation at my expense. She pointed a long manicured finger directly at me, at the back of the room. Her voice, now shrill and sharp, echoed through the ballroom. "You know who would know all the boring, nerdy details," she announced, a malicious grin spreading across her face. "My cousin, Sloane. She's my biggest fan, practically stalks my work. She's obsessed with the science of it all." She gave a dismissive wave of her hand. "I'm sure the nobody in the back has an answer for you." Every single head in the room swiveled to look at me. 200 pairs of eyes, all focused on the girl in the $20 dress. The spotlight operator, following Brittany's pointed finger, swung the bright hot beam directly onto my face. It was the ultimate power move, the public shaming, the final definitive branding of me as the pathetic, obsessed loser. This was exactly how she had planned to end it, with me exposed and ridiculed. But as I stood there, Bathed in the blinding light, I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel fear. I felt nothing but a cold, liberating calm. The spotlight held no terror for me anymore. It was exactly where I needed to be. The silence in the ballroom was a tangible thing, thick and heavy with anticipation. Every eye was on me, the nobody in the back. Brittany stood on stage, her chest heaving slightly, a triumphant, cruel smirk on her face. She thought she had won. She had successfully thrown me to the wolves. I took a breath, ready to speak, ready to dismantle her entire world with a single sentence. But before I could utter a word, a calm, authoritative voice cut through the tension from the side of the room. Perhaps I can clarify. All heads turned. Dr. Alistair Finch stepped out from the shadows near the exit. He walked forward a few paces, his posture erect, his presence commanding the room's attention instantly. He wasn't just some guest, he radiated an aura of intellectual gravity that no one could ignore. "My name is Dr. Alistair Finch," he said, his voice resonant and clear. "And as the supervising researcher on this project, I can assure you, Mr. Thorne, that the proprietary catalytic agent is perfectly stable, and thermal degradation is a non-issue due to a unique cross-linking process." A wave of confused murmurs swept through the crowd. On stage, Brittany's face, which had been flushed with victory, turned a ghastly waxy white. The smirk vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of pure shock. Her parents, Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark, exchanged bewildered glances. Who was this man? How did he know these things? But the show was just getting started. As Dr. Finch held the audience captive, a second figure stepped forward. This one from the main entrance of the ballroom. It was the resort's general manager, a man named Mr. Davies, whom I had met with just that morning. He was flanked by two stern-looking security guards. He didn't walk toward the stage, he walked directly toward me. He stopped a few feet away, his expression a perfect mask of professional deference. He spoke into the radio on his lapel. "Security, stand by at all exits. We are a go." Then, he turned his full attention to me. He inclined his head slightly and spoke, his voice not loud, but projected with such clarity that everyone in the first 10 rows could hear him perfectly. "Ms. Parker," he said, "we are ready to proceed on your signal." The room buzzed with confusion. "Ms. Parker? Why was the manager talking to me?" Brittany's eyes darted from Dr. Finch to the manager, then to me, her mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. Then, Mr. Davies delivered the first, devastating blow of the power reveal. "As the person who actually owns the resort where we stand," he announced, his gaze still fixed on me, "the floor is yours." A collective gasp, sharp and sudden, sucked the air out of the room. It was followed by a wave of frantic whispering. Jaws literally dropped. The investor in the front row, a portly man with a gold watch, turned to his companion, his mouth agape. Aunt Carol's hand flew to her chest, her face a comical picture of disbelief. My mother just stared, her face pale and utterly lost. The narrative shattered. I wasn't just the nerdy cousin who knew the boring details. I wasn't just a failure. The ground beneath everyone's feet had just shifted. The shockwave radiated from me, the quiet girl in the corner, and hit them with the force of a physical impact. I hadn't just invented the plastic. With the initial seed funding secured by the promise of the patent, my very first power move, my first act as the head of my own nascent company, was to buy the entire Elysian Resort Hotel through a holding company. I owned the building, I owned the land, I owned the very stage on which my cousin was standing. This wasn't her party anymore. It had never. The ballroom descended into chaos. The air, once filled with polite applause, was now thick with frantic whispers and the frantic tapping of fingers on smartphones. On stage, Brittany was completely speechless, her face a mask of utter bewilderment. She looked like she had been struck by lightning. Her father, my Uncle Mark, was the first to recover. He surged to his feet, his face red and contorted with rage. He pointed a trembling finger at me. "This is absurd," he shouted, his voice cracking. "She's a loser. She's a nobody. She works a dead-end job. How could she possibly own this place?" He was defending the world as he knew it, a world where he was at the top, and I was at the bottom, a world that was now crumbling before his very eyes. But his blustering was immediately undercut by the calm, factual voice of the tech journalist, Marcus Thorne. He was looking at his phone, his eyes wide with professional excitement. He had just found the story of a lifetime. "He's wrong," Thorne announced to the people around him, his voice carrying in the stunned silence. "I'm looking at the public property records right now. The deed for this resort and the surrounding properties was transferred 3 days ago to a newly formed holding company. The name of the company is Parker Industries." Parker Industries. My name. My father's name. The confirmation, coming from a respected, impartial source, sent a second shockwave through the room. It was true. It was real. Now, finally, it was my turn to speak. I took a step forward, out of the shadows and into the full glare of the spotlight. My voice, when it came, was not loud, but it was steady and clear, cutting through the remaining buzz of confusion. "He's right," I said, looking directly at Marcus Thorne, then letting my gaze sweep over the shocked faces of my relatives. "My company did purchase this resort, but that's not the most important document here tonight." On cue, as we had rehearsed, a side door opened and my lawyer, Miss Hayes, walked in. She was carrying a sleek, black leather portfolio. She walked with purpose, ignoring the stunned woes, and came to a stop beside Marcus Thorne. She opened the portfolio and handed him a sheaf of papers. "This," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and power I had never known I possessed, "is the official granted United States patent for the core technology behind Viridian Innovations, the one Miss Vance has built her entire company on." Marcus Thorne took the document. The room held its breath. He scanned the front page, his eyes widening even further. He cleared his throat and read the key information aloud. "United States Patent and Trademark Office. Patent number 11B7894. Title: Method for Lignin-Based Polymer Synthesis." He paused for a beat, letting the tension build to an unbearable peak. Then he read the final crucial line. "Inventor, Sloan Parker." A wave of absolute, profound, shocked silence fell over the crowd. It was the silence of 150 people simultaneously rewriting their entire understanding of reality. I watched as the truth landed, blow by blow. I saw my Aunt Carol stagger back a step, as if physically struck. I saw my Uncle Mark sink back into his chair, his face ashen. I saw the investors looking at each other, then at Brittany, then at me, their expressions shifting from admiration for her to cold, hard calculation. But the reaction I focused on, the one that meant the most, was Caleb's, the neutral observer. He stood frozen, his eyes fixed on the patent document in the journalist's hands. He looked at Brittany on the stage, at her crumbling facade of lies, the ugly panic now naked on her face. Then his head turned, and he looked at me, and in his eyes I saw it all, the shock, the dawning comprehension. And finally, a look of profound, undeniable respect. He saw the truth. He saw who the real power in the room was. In that single silent moment, the neutral observer had picked a side. And then I looked at my mother. She was standing now, her hand over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. But they weren't tears of pride for Brittany. They were tears of shock, of regret, of a devastating, soul-crushing realization of just how blind she had been. The truth had finally broken through her years of willful denial. The silence finally shattered. It was Brittany who broke it. Cornered, exposed, and utterly defeated, her carefully constructed world turned to dust around her. She snapped. The mask of the sophisticated CEO fell away, revealing the snarling, entitled brat she had always been underneath. With a shriek of pure rage, she launched herself off the stage, stumbling in her high heels, her beautiful green gown tangling around her legs. She pointed a shaking, accusatory finger at me, her face contorted in a mask of fury. "You!" she screamed, her voice raw and ugly. "You did this. You set me up. You were always jealous of me. Jealous of everything I have. You're just a pathetic loser, you got lucky." Her words, the same insults she had hurled at me, my whole life, echoed in the now silent room. Loser. Lucky. They were hollow, meaningless words now. They had no power over me. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I stood my ground as she stormed toward me, her eyes wild. I let her get within a few feet, close enough that the whole room could see the contrast between her hysterical rage and my absolute calm. I looked her dead in the eye. "I'm not lucky, Brittany," I said, my voice low, precise, and lethally sharp. "I just did the work you pretended to do. The late nights, the failures, the sacrifices. That was all." I took a small step closer, forcing her to take a step back. "This isn't your company. It was never your idea. You are not a CEO. You're a fraud. You didn't build this from nothing. You tried to build it on a foundation of my sweat and my tears, but you were too arrogant to realize that I owned the ground it was built on." The two security guards who had entered with the manager now moved, smoothly and professionally, to flank Brittany. She looked at them, then back at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. I gave them a slight nod. Then I turned my attention to the rest of her family, my stunned aunt and uncle, who were still frozen in their seats. "I believe this is now a private event," I announced, my voice carrying to every corner of the room. "A celebration for the true founder of this technology and its real investors." My gaze swept over the shocked faces of the money men in the front row, who were now looking at me with undisguised avarice and respect. I turned back to the guards. "Please escort these people out." Aunt Carol let out a horrified shriek. "You can't do this. We're family." "You stopped being my family a long time ago," I said, my voice cold as ice. The guards took Brittany gently but firmly by the arms. She began to struggle, her screams turning into incoherent sobs. "No, you can't. This is my party, my night." They led her away, a hysterical, weeping mess. Her father, Uncle Mark, his face pale and slack, allowed himself to be led out without a word, a broken man. Aunt Carol followed, still sputtering with impotent rage, her insults lost in the cavernous, silent ballroom. The family that had mocked me, laughed at me, and kicked me out of their lives for years was now being physically kicked out of my party, in my resort. The last thing I saw was my mother, standing alone, watching them go, her face a portrait of devastating regret. The victory wasn't just sweet, it was absolute. In the moments after my family was escorted out, the atmosphere in the ballroom transformed. The stunned silence gave way to an excited, feverish buzz. The investors, who had moments before been ready to write checks to a fraud, now descended upon me. They weren't just shaking my hand, they were grabbing it, their eyes alight with the thrill of a deal far more promising than the one they had walked in for. "Miss Parker, phenomenal," one of them boomed, clapping me on the shoulder. "A masterstroke. The technology is one thing, but that execution, brilliant," another one chimed in. I smiled, nodded, and accepted their business cards, my mind clear and focused. Dr. Finch stood beside me, a proud, protective presence, fielding the more technical questions with gruff efficiency. Through the throng of new admirers, I saw Caleb approach. "Tlon." He waited patiently until there was a lull in the conversation. He looked exhausted, as if he'd just run a marathon. He didn't offer excuses or try to explain, he just looked me in the eye, his expression filled with a sincere, profound regret. "Sorry," he said. It was just one word, but it was enough. It was an apology for believing the lies, for the pity, for his part in the charade. I gave him a small, accepting nod. He returned it, then turned and walked out of the ballroom, and out of Brittany's life, without a single look back. Then, I saw my mother making her way toward me, her steps hesitant. Her face was tear-streaked, her eyes pleading. She reached out, as if to embrace me. Sloane, I am so sorry. I had no idea. I took a gentle step back, just out of her reach. It wasn't a cruel gesture, but it was a clear one. A new boundary, drawn in stone. The hurt she had caused, the years of choosing her sister's approval over her daughter's well-being, couldn't be erased with a single apology at my victory party. I know you didn't, Mom, I said softly, but with a firmness she had never heard from me before. We'll talk later. She nodded, fresh tears welling in her eyes, and retreated. Forgiveness would not come easily. It would have to be earned. Later, when the last of the investors had finally left, their heads full of numbers and potential, Dr. Finch and I stepped out onto the wide, private balcony connected to the ballroom. The city glittered below us, a carpet of a million tiny lights. The cool night air felt clean, washing away the last traces of the drama. Dr. Finch was holding 2 glasses of champagne, handed to him by a respectfully silent Mr. Davies. He handed one to me. He raised his glass, the crystal catching the moonlight. He looked at me, a rare, genuine smile gracing his features. To Parker Industries, he said. I clinked my glass against his. To Parker Industries, I echoed. I took a sip, the bubbles bursting on my tongue, and I smiled. A real, deep, and truly free smile. I looked out at the sprawling city, my city now, in a way. I hadn't needed a will reading, or a surprise check from a long-lost relative. I didn't need their inheritance. I had been given something far more valuable. I had inherited my father's integrity and his brilliant mind, and with that inheritance, I had built my own empire, brick by painful brick. The family failure, the nobody, the loser, was now the owner of her own destiny, and she was just getting started. My story is proof that the labels other people give you, failure, loser, nobody, only have power if you let them. The world will try to tell you who you are, but you are the only one who gets to write your own story and own your name. So I want to ask you a question. What labels have you refused to accept in your own life? Let me know in the comments below. Reading your stories of strength gives me strength. And if my story resonated with you, if you've ever felt underestimated, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about turning the tables and taking back your power. Thanks for watching.